So I'll get quickly started, right? My name is Joy Parekh, and I would like to welcome you all to this webinar. Frankly, it's no surprise that we live in very odd times right now. Like, I think most of us have never witnessed such like heightened levels of uncertainty, and it's like a resultant impact on like our social, emotional, and financial like well-being. I think every once in a while, it's important to lean towards the collective wisdom of leaders who have led us to success, as in the past. And I think on that note, I would like to welcome both Imran and Nikhil to this webinar. Very quickly, I'll take this opportunity to introduce our speaker, Imran. Imran is the founding member of the Gaja Capital team and has over 18 years of experience in private equity across the education, pharmaceuticals, and the technology arenas. Imran has co-led investments in the education and the consumer clusters at Gaja Capital. Apart from this, Imran also contributes to team formation as well as in fact strengthening Gaja Capital's proprietary deal development capabilities. I would like to take this opportunity to quickly welcome Imran, and we also on this call have Nikhil Barshikar with us, who is the founder and the MD at Imarticus Learning, who will take this conversation forward. Over to you, Nikhil.
Hey guys. Hey Imran.
Hey Nikhil, thanks Joy, and welcome everyone.
Imran, thank you for the time, as usual. Imran, let's start. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How does someone who's an engineer start a private equity firm, and sort of your experience has been fairly varied in terms of different types of firms, etc. So tell us how you got here, and tell us how the map is. This what you imagined, or is this more than what you had imagined? Tell us a little bit.
It's definitely more than what I imagined. But I started off, Nikhil, as a techie. I worked my first job was in Wipro Technologies, and I spent 2 years out of the first 4 in Wipro as a software programmer, and very soon realized that my heart was in education. So right off the bat, in my first job in Wipro, I moved to the training department, and I helped the company develop their first e-learning program, which we used to call at that time the Wipro Virtual Campus. Then I went to business school, which was great for me for 2 reasons. One is I had a summer internship at the View Group, which my partner Gopal used to run. That was my first brush with venture capital, and I found my wife there. So it was special for those 2 very important reasons. And after business school, I joined the pharmaceutical industry for a couple of years. Dr. Reddy's, that was a great place to be. Learned a completely different sector compared to IT services, and made a long-term friend. So Dr. Anji Reddy, who's no more, his foundation, and Prasad, who's the CEO, are investors in our fund. So those, that was the start of a very long-term, valuable relationship for me personally and for Gaja. And 15 years ago, I came back, joined hands with Gopal and Ranjit to start Gaja Capital, and I've been here ever since. And it's been great. I feel fortunate.
Imran, in terms of, tell us how you thought about Gaja Capital, how Gopal, you, and sort of the team thought through it. What gap did you see in terms of when you established it, etc. Clearly now, sort of hindsight is 2020. You guys are killing it. It's a large fund. I have stopped counting how many. This is your 4th or 5th fund. Is that right?
We just completed our 3rd fund, Nikhil. We're going to raise our 4th. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how you started off, what you thought about it, what was the gap that you were trying to address, and how you sort of established, if you will.
So in those days, I'm talking 2002. This was after the crash. Late 90s. In the late 90s, venture capital was essentially about this arbitrage of rupee cost and dollar revenue. And that snowballed into the large IT services, ITES industry that we know today. So View Group was investing in pre-Series A, Series A investing at that time. And after the crash, this was Gopal's idea really. His insight was that, like the more developed markets in the US and Europe, the most successful investors will be investors that are homegrown, that are focused on domestic demand. But there's only so much you can do in this whole, cost arbitrage game. And so we all came together with a vision that we will be entrepreneurs like you, Nikhil. We'll be entrepreneurs first. We'll be entrepreneurs in the private equity and venture capital industry. At that time, I remember the total investments were about $1 billion a year. So it was much, much smaller than the industry it is today. So it was a call on the nascency of the industry and how much that will grow. But it was also a call on the fact that the most successful investors will develop coverage and deal origination and relationships with businesses and CEOs that are focused on the Indian market. So that was really the genesis of it. And we've stayed true to that thesis over the last 15 years.
And does the consumer-focused sort of retail story come from that mindset, etc.? Because clearly you've had lots of successes in your portfolio. Maybe you can walk us through, maybe not all of them, but maybe talk a little bit about how you think about your investment thesis. What are some of the notable deals that come to mind you've done over the last 5 to 6 years, maybe?
Sure. So see, in the last 15 years, as you know, Nikhil, we have invested in 3 sectors: education, consumer, financial services. And education has been our most consistent, almost systematic investment plan, as I joke often. And we've invested across the board in education. The most notable investments in education are TeamLease, which is a temporary staffing company run by Manish Sabharwal. It's listed. That was a successful investment for us. And more recently, EuroKids, which has over 1,000 preschools and 30 K-12 schools, which we recently, last year, exited to KKR. And under KKR, of course, their ambitions have grown. In consumer, we've invested in a retail company called Chumbak. It's exclusively focused on women. It's a very exciting design-led brand. And we really invested in that because we feel, the Indian consumer market will see a lot more of companies like Chumbak focused on clearly identifiable business segments, a strong design signature, almost a bridge to luxury kind of a thesis. We had a lot of fun investing in an Alcobev company called John Distilleries. That was a very successful investment for us. We sold to a US-based company called Sazerac. And Paul's a great guy. We developed a whole stack of products, but we're most proud of the single malt that we developed in our distillery in Goa, and now we sell in over 50 countries around the world. And it's probably one of the most awarded best-selling single malts from India. And it was exciting enough that Paul lent his name to it. So it's called Paul John. You guys should try it if there's any whiskey connoisseur here. And in financial services, the most notable ones would be, RBL Bank, which had a very successful listing, one of the highest, fastest growth private sector banks, in a long time that got listed after we came in. And of course, there's there are others as well, like Suryodaya, which is a small finance bank in Kinara. So, but concentrated in these 3 sectors.
Changing track, Vikrant, Imran, let's talk about, when I first, and I'll tell you when I first thought about or heard about COVID, I said, and I remember March 19th or 20th, they said, sort of no offices, go home type of thing. I was like, people are overreacting. We'll be back in 10 days. And, I acted like it'll pass, etc. Clearly, I couldn't have been more wrong. And were you a lot more, did you think it through completely? Did you say, look, this is going to go on for the next X amount of time? And is that how you approached it from your portfolio company, etc.?
No, so, everyone has forecasts. We've learned, investors learn this lesson very early, that you can't forecast any macro indicator, right? So you can't forecast currency, you can't forecast, a lot of these things. And so while while anecdotally and informally, a lot of us had put out some numbers out there, when will it peak, and so on. There were two things that were interesting. One is that because of our global network, because our investors are in other parts of the world, I thought we got a bit of a lead time. So I think the paranoia started hitting us maybe 3 weeks in advance of the March 20th work from home deadline. And that's great. One of the so that was good, in fact, because some LPs started asking us for notes on the COVID impact assessment, on employee safety. We have a lot of DFIs on our as LPs. So that started happening, let's say, in the first week of March. And on March 19th, we decided to do a dry run of working from home. And interestingly, March 20th, everything went into lockdown, or 21st, I don't remember now. But we've been working from home from March 20th. So one thing was we got a bit of lead time. Second, I'm glad we didn't wait. So there was a choice with our portfolio companies. Should we wait till things become clear and then take action? Or should we take action and then provide relief later? And we decided to follow the latter strategy, which in hindsight actually was a good idea. And to be specific, the debates in crisis always is, should there be cost cuts? How much, how deep, and when? And we decided to, and there's always a range, and we decided to take the most severe cost cuts as early as possible. And now we are in a position in a lot of our portfolio companies where we can cite resumption and therefore relief.
Imran, where did that come from? Where did that, call it, for a lack of better word, wisdom, to come from, to say, look, this is more severe, let's take more cost cuts, let's think through, etc. Was that, walk us through from a mindset, because all of us go back and think about, what could I have done better? What are the things that I could have maybe done differently, etc. How did you come to that particular decision in terms of what was the process like?
It comes from scar tissue. It comes from having taken the bullets quite a few times in our careers. That's where this learning comes from. And I think as a team, first of all, we've got a mix of gray hair and entrepreneurial experience and professional experience. Nearly half of our team are very senior operating professionals who've been CFOs of large companies or heads of HR of large companies. So I'm very proud of the fact that Gaja has this very diverse team that have seen varied contexts and have weathered many crises. So I think that's where it comes from. Because we have a controlled mindset, a lot of our companies, we are in control positions. I think we feel we're more accountable than the typical minority investor, right? Because if something goes wrong, if there's a child safety incident, or if there's an incident in one of our restaurants, or if there's a crisis, we are accountable along with our CEOs to make sure we fix it. So I think we're like a car without shock absorbers, and I think that helps.
Which I think it's in line, right? And I know a little bit about, you guys are not scared of taking control stakes, which is very, it's good to see, but it's very rare as such. So I think it's in line with that. Let's talk a little bit about, before we talk about education, which I know is the main sort of agenda, if you will, but let's lead into it. Talk to me a little bit about economy, and maybe we make this webinar, you and me make this webinar a lot more positive than, so talk to me a little bit about, what are you saying? Is there good news? Where do you think recovery comes from an economy perspective more than education perspective? Right. So what are you saying?
Yeah. So I think, look, this crisis is real. Okay. We haven't in our careers seen a crisis where companies have had to post zero revenue in a quarter. So I think in that sense, one has to keep, whatever I say after this, and I'm going to talk about a silver lining, but whatever I say about the silver lining doesn't take away from the fact that this has, affected business, it's affected livelihoods, it's affected jobs in a very real way. And around the world, and everyone knows that, right? The good news, however, is that as the health crisis starts receding in other parts of the world, the headlines are now moving towards resumption. There's, real resumption of activity in parts of Europe. The US has either forgotten or the elections have hijacked the crisis, and they're not talking about the health crisis anymore. It's moved very quickly from the health crisis to Black Lives Matter to, elections. So, the US is completely on a different trip. China is completely back in terms of economic activity, as we know. And India will. And I see it in my own companies. This week, a few of us, like you, Nikhil, have been working out of office. I started working out of office from Sunday. The logic of that is not that we are cowboys or reckless. We just realize that the virus is here to stay. And you can do all the academic protocols, on your spreadsheet, but you have to take it for a spin, which is what we did. So I must say that our team did a great job of, creating a safe space in our office for us to feel comfortable to resume work. So like us, like you, like some of our CEOs who started resuming work, people have realized this is going to be here for some time. We have to get back to work. We have to focus on productivity and focus on what our customers' needs are. And I think that cumulative effect of everyone saying enough is enough, let's get on with it, will show up in results. I'm not a big fan of the alphabet. I mean, the economists are fighting over whether it's a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery or a W. So I can't comment on that. That's not my area of expertise. But in my portfolio companies, through that lens, I can say that economic activity is slowly coming back, and in some categories, sharply coming back.
Imran, has your portfolio, given that you're very consumer/retail focused in terms of, has your portfolio, overall portfolio, not only education, has it been impacted more, you think, in terms of when you compare it to maybe other, do you think you would have diversified a bit more and maybe done more? Actually, I was going to say another sector, but I can't figure out a sector that's been less impacted as such. But is there a play that you thought you could have diversified a little bit more, given that you're completely consumer/retail focused?
So, this is a DNA question. When we started, we all decided that we will create alpha by having a very concentrated portfolio. And we knew the risk we were taking back then. And the reason we said that is because we said we will be high touch. We'll be a high touch, very involved investor who will not just show up once a quarter to ask the CEOs the time, but to really work shoulder to shoulder and squeeze out that alpha in these companies. So as a result, it was a trade-off, right? You are giving up the gains of diversification, but on the other hand, you are contributing very meaningfully, significant bandwidth, both operating skills, like I described, we have an operating team, as well as financial skills, to be able to squeeze out that extra turn of return. And that's worked really well for us. So have we been hurt through the crisis? Yes, we have. I can't comment on whether relatively we've been hurt less or more. It feels like we've been hurt less from the lens of, for example, are the balance sheets, have we been able to insulate our balance sheet from, let's say, the demand shock of the P&L? I'd say we have very successfully been able to do that. That's one measure, but I think how badly we're all hurt depends on how long this prolongs, and it's company specific. But in general, our sector selection, these are defensive sectors, education, financial services, consumer. And you're running an education business, so you know how that feels. But I think what I like is whatever is the pain, we're not just witnessing the pain. We are in the trenches trying to fix it. So I think that gives me the confidence that we'll be able to, we'll lose IRR because we'll lose time, but we'll protect value.
Let me try to get you into trouble. See if you fall for it. What do you think of? And we're going to run a poll. We have about 260 people and we're going to do a poll right after your answer. So, what do you think about the government's response? You're happy with it? You're not happy with it? They could have done more. I know you have banking. You're exposed to banking and financial services firms. You're exposed to education. You're exposed to retail sector. You like what they're doing? They should have done more. They should have done less. Give us a little bit.
Yeah, I know you want a poll, so a yes or no answer, but it's so nuanced. It's very, very nuanced. I'd say that if you compare our government to governments around the world, I'd say we are, like investors talk about top quartile, top decile returns, right? I'd certainly say we are a top quartile government, but I'll say we are a top decile society. I feel this very strongly. And despite all these horror stories you see about no beds and, hundreds and thousands of migrants moving cities and so on, in general, compare India to what you're seeing in the US. You have a society that has been patient despite significant pain. They haven't resorted to looting. They haven't resorted to, widespread violence. They've taken it on the chin, and that's why I think our society is top decile. And why did I say the government is top quartile? Because they were able to give a pretty good. They were able to effect a pretty decent lockdown, even by global standards, for a very, very large population. And very early and very decisive. The critique of the government will be that the lockdown would appear having been completely wasted when you see the numbers on the other side of the lockdown. But that doesn't take away from the fact that, this government was able to get everyone in line without any force, without sending the army, without tear gassing them.
Yeah.
I think it's a very, very positive message for the world.
I think the US sets the bar quite low. So
That's true.
Yeah. Joy, what are you doing?
Yeah, well, I've just launched the poll.
Yeah. So I'm actually curious to.
So now I biased everyone, looks like, but let's see.
We'll keep this on for the next 10 seconds or so. But I'll just end it now.
Pretty easy. Yeah, that's close to 65% in the excellent to good sort of category. Imran, let's talk a little bit. Thanks, John. Imran, let's talk about education, right? And I'll break the sort of the flow into impact and response as such, in terms of what's the impact been, and more than financial services, because the education business, like a lot of businesses, but more for the education business, is a lot about sort of consumer behavior and what they think about safety, and lots of other things come into play. There are kids involved, which is a whole nother sort of benchmark to hit in terms of K to 12 type of thing. So, sort of comment on that a little bit in terms of, how do you see the education system being impacted, other than, sort of the lockdown and etc. maybe talk to a little bit about, financials, consumer behavior, a little bit both. We can go back and forth a little bit on this.
Sure. So see, first of all, let me start with my own conviction. I think India is the most attractive private education market in the world. We put a lot of money to work on this thesis. We've devoted a good part of our lives on this thesis, and I don't think that the COVID crisis changes this fundamental conviction. And a lot of keywords here. It's the most attractive. So I mean it seriously when I say there is no other market that is more attractive than India. It is the most attractive. And the second is the private education market. So I say this because the privatization in India by market share, in other words, parents voting for private education over even free government education over the last decades has resulted in Indian enrollments in the K-12 sector as well as higher education systematically move from government to private. You've seen this in banking as well, right? The private banks have gained over PSU banks, despite PSU banks giving you higher interest rates, despite them giving you lower interest rate loans, higher interest rate fixed deposits, and so on. Customers have voted. So in my view, this train has left the station. This train is very different from China, where privatization hasn't caught up as much as it has in India. This train is very different from the US, where the state operates and owns most of the education assets. If you include foundations and philanthropy, you have you have a very, very small, far smaller share for independent private institutions than you see in India. So that's the backdrop of our conviction. Under that backdrop, you have this COVID crisis. And what this COVID crisis has done, it has induced trial of collaboration online, of consuming content online, of making the brick and mortar institutions more relevant at homes because they had no choice. So if you take the K-12 sector, what happened between what happened largely during the lockdown, and this is more a lockdown acceleration as opposed to the COVID crisis acceleration, that schools had no choice but to make something available to students at home to justify their fees and perhaps also to just deliver. That was probably the biggest motivation, but also to deliver learning. And a lot of pedagogical research points to how learning has this almost exponential decay curve, and parents are very worried about it. And schools had to very quickly get their act together. Now, having got their act together, and just quick numbers in the K-12 sector, there were about 28 million active EdTech users every month. That number is more than doubled to maybe 64, 65 million. And this is desperation, right? This is because your schools are shut, you had to do something. Yeah. Now, whether that something was effective is a whole different PhD topic. But the conclusion is that if you Zoom bomb children with incessant live classes, morning to evening, you are not making learning happen. That's very clear. And parents are up in arms. They're asking schools for discounts. They're saying Zoom classes are not equal to teacher effectiveness. Our parents are not dumb. They want more. They want personalization. They want it to be more data-driven. They don't want Zoom classes to be administered in a way where you have 30 tiles on a Zoom class, and you have someone's parent sitting there, without the mute button on, negotiating his business while there is a live class on. These are all, by the way, real examples. So I think the good news is it's induced trial, and it's induced trial in a way that that educators and principals and school owners and parents, people who are the least had the least propensity to even try what Zoom looks like, or what Google Hangouts looks like, or what Microsoft Teams look like. They've at least done a dry run. So it was a little bit like demonetization. People scrambled to figure out how does Paytm work, etc. And I think that is here to stay. And what this creates an opportunity for someone, and I'll come to higher education in a moment. It creates an opportunity for someone to create, an experience that delivers learning, creates an infrastructure to measure learning, to personalize learning, and take it to the next level. And I think that's a very, very exciting opportunity for entrepreneurs and edtech companies and so on. And a similar dynamic is happening in your business, in higher education. The Ashoka universities of the world are creating Ashoka X propositions like Harvard X and so on. You have career schools that have taken their classes online. And then you have the traditional universities who just put a lock and key and went home. Basically, nothing happened, right? And they just don't know how to get their act together. They're sitting on this value of their certificate and entitlement. But I think eventually they will die, because eventually students will figure out that what really matters beyond the credentials are the skills. And if you have a organization that gets their act together very quickly and delivers those skills in a cost competitive manner, in an effective manner, and as a result of those skills, you're able to get a job, especially at a time when jobs are scarce. Value will shift from these traditional brick and mortar institutions to these more innovative career schools or career oriented schools, that can deliver the ROI that students are looking for. Long answer to your question, but in general, I feel it's accelerated a trend that was already underway pre-COVID.
But do you think the consumer behavior, if you will, of this, I'm open. For example, I'll give you an example, which is in line with what you're saying. Is my daughter used to do piano classes, now she does them on Zoom, and it's actually they're more effective than she going to whoever she was going to, etc. Right? So I get the point that look, more and more people maybe, and if somebody had told me that, I would have said it doesn't make a lot of sense. But right now, I'm a big buyer of it, etc. But and there are multiple examples of people wearing masks now, and less people wear masks now. Do you think the consumer behavior, enough has happened to change the consumer mindset, the consumer behavior, or 6 months from now, we are like, a lot of people say this, right? I mean, I have been told my offline centers are going to go out of business. And I don't need offline centers anymore. You need to do everything online. Look, you don't even need offices anymore, by the way. Everybody's going to work from home, and commercial real estate is never going to come back. In education, which has its own intricacies, how how movable or immovable is consumer behavior, you think, and how permanent is this change?
So consumer behavior, if you go back to every crisis, and I would concede that this is a different crisis from any crisis I've seen in my lifetime or read about. One will have to really go back to 1918 and do all these extrapolations to see what happened after 1918, because that's the crisis to kind of mirror if you were to. But if you take crisis in general, and there's some examples, right? There is SARS, and similar crises that happened earlier, maybe not at the scale. Consumers have short memories. They will come back. And you're seeing this, right? They're flooding beaches, they're flooding bars and restaurants, they're throwing caution to the wind, and they're just getting back to what they used to do. In many ways, as I was driving to office, I just looked around. I must say that the good thing is that I feel that people have changed their behavior. I think it'll be unfair to say that people have just thrown caution to the wind. I see people wearing masks. I see at least an attempt to maintain social distancing. I feel people are sufficiently scared which is a good thing, frankly, at a time like this, where people are taking precautions. But I also feel that, look, it all boils down to the prefrontal cortex, right? I mean, if you're a teenager, or you're a young man or woman in your 20s, and you discover very quickly that actually it doesn't matter for you personally or your cohort, you'll care about your parents and your grandparents at home. But eventually other things will just take over, and you'll start going to malls and shops and restaurants and bars, and you'll get on with your life. And so I think that people will get on with their lives. People will be more cautious entering gyms, for example, perhaps restaurants. I'm not sure, how it will be with, let's say, sporting academies. We have a business in sports, so I worry about that. How soon will parents feel comfortable sending their kids to academies, or to centers and so on? But eventually, Nikhil, we should assume that things will come back, and not because they should, but because they will, right? Because that's the nature of consumer behavior. And therefore, if you're a responsible business, maybe instead of shutting down offices and shutting down centers and all of that, maybe one should ask ourselves, what do you need to do to make students or customers feel comfortable and safe to come back, to your physical environment? Just like my team made me feel safe to go back to my office, I didn't have to. I'm sure there's a case to be made for schools and colleges and centers and restaurants and academies.
No, I completely agree. I think this is not a win type of situation. This is a deal type of situation. So you have to live with it rather than sort of win against it type of thing. So I completely agree. You talked a little bit about responses, right? And you talked about some traditional guys just shut shop and said, look, maybe I'll come 6 months later to figure out what's going on. Talk a little bit more about that in terms of, how have you seen different types of education companies respond, the good and the bad? Where have you seen, innovation, and where have you seen sort of people think completely out of the box? And maybe you can, feel free to give anecdotal evidence without names if you can.
Sure. So I can, I think I'll give a few examples from our portfolio. So in EuroKids, I thought the most, the smart thing that Prajod at EuroKids did is he announced a date when schools would reopen. And he published that date, June 8th, and created a huge campaign around that start date, right? There was a lot of song and dance. He got Shan, to do this, this show for teachers and educators. He got everyone pumped up and excited. And the schools aren't open, in physical form because the government doesn't allow it, but they went completely online and they went live on the date. So, I thought that was very smart. It was almost like Elon Musk saying, look, yes, we'll wear masks and so on, but, we're going to launch that. We're going to launch that dragon, right? And it's got to happen on time when the weather permits it. And I thought that was smart in hindsight. And as a result, he was able to build the case to collect fees, which is also important, right, for a business. So the go live idea that you publish a date and tell your customers we're going live, I think is a good one. The second thing I can think of from our portfolio is in educational initiatives. We've been in business for 18 years. We don't have a single free customer. We never gave our products for free. We used to constantly compare our numbers to Byju's and others who had massive, fan following, I'd say. But, in the freemium model, you have this, you have to build the top of the funnel and then you get some paid users. And we have 1 million paid users. And we succumb to, some of my colleagues, in the firm and loud voices from the company to say, look, let's try free, okay? And it's the right thing to do during a crisis. So we just tried that as an experiment. And within 3 weeks, we were able to get 850,000 registrations for a product called MindSpark. And that was an eye-opener. I mean, we were expecting, 10 or 20,000 here and there. as an experiment, and it was really meant to do good. And suddenly we had this top of the funnel without hiring Shah Rukh Khan, without paying all that CAC. And I thought that was smart. And the team got together, they worked nights, you have to tinker around to make it possible. And now it's created this whole workflow within the team to say, look, now you've got this 850,000 top of the funnel. Now let's see what the yields are. And that was completely academic prior to this experiment. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And we've got tons of usage data and customer data, and we're going through this great, gold mine of data and feedback that I'm sure we'll gain from. So I think that was another interesting thing we saw. And on the other side, let's take, I'm just thinking about, I'm just jogging my memory of, to take maybe a consumer company, in massive restaurants, which was very badly hit because we are a restaurant. Our restaurants were shut. We were not able to start. That triggered a whole wave of innovation as well, because we were forced to think about cuisines that we can deliver online, and we were forced to re-engineer our entire offering. And we would never have been able to do that if not for this crisis. So yeah, these are a few examples in the portfolio.
You talked about, that, you were obviously very sort of long on the education sector in India, and your investment thesis hasn't changed because of COVID and et cetera, et cetera. But are there areas that you as an investor are more attractive than the others? What are some of these areas? And do you see any, some areas that are in massive types of trouble in sort of the Indian education ecosystem that concerns you, not only as an investor maybe, but also as a consumer? Give us maybe the bright spots and sort of the danger spots, if you will, overall.
So, I've said this before, so it might sound stale, but, an education actually is a very simple business, right? And depending on your...
After spending 7 years, you tell me now it's simple business.
and you know what I mean, right? That if you are a career school, your only job is to get someone a job, right? So it's literally that simple. And if that person already has a job, then your only job is to get him a salary hike. And of course, there are dependencies. I mean, we're not running an auction here. You get a job or you get an increase in salary if you get skills. And obviously, the real job is to impart those skills. But we can't lose sight of that outcome. Similarly, in the K-12 system, we can't lose sight of the fact that there are several schools and service providers to schools and tutoring companies who have great marketing budgets. They have a lot of activity and they're keeping kids busy from morning to evening and not really moving the needle in imparting the conceptual understanding that children need to move from one level to the next, to the next, to the next, right? So there is almost a blatant disregard of any pedagogical research out there. And there is this marketplace of snake oils that parents are just lapping up, and many of them taking loans to lap up, but are eventually just going to go down the drain because they will not move the needle at all for a vast majority of students. And as a result, if you look at the 10th board exams, I mean, a very large percentage of students fail. And that, by the way, means nothing because the exam is set on rote learning and memory and not application. So if you even failed on memory, I don't know what it tells you. And if you pass, what does it tell you? So I think we're testing wrong. We're testing the wrong skills. We're imparting the wrong skills and perhaps ineffectively. And we have this whole broken system. I know I'm sounding a little negative, but I'd say unfortunately, the norm is organizations of very well-meaning people very deeply passionate about making a difference, but unfortunately doing the same thing over and over and again and expecting different results. And I feel sad about that. I do feel sad about that. But having said that, there is a small tribe of people who get it, and people who get it are doing a great job, but they face the other problem, what I call the good guys. The good guys face the other problem. They fix one problem, but they have a scalability challenge. And I think the common area in the Venn diagram of people who are moving the needle on a unit level and are scalable is very, very rare. It's almost Olympian. And that summarizes the the dilemma in education in general, by the way. But we haven't lost faith. We're still looking and working with companies and building companies to see if we can populate that very narrow common area in the Venn diagram.
In terms of your, and I'm mindful of the time. I have another 3-4 minutes with you because I want to keep 10 minutes for Q&A. So, Gaja has been one of the few investors, if I may, who've made money in the education business. And very few investors have done that successfully. And you have not done that as if I may say so, as a freak event. You've consistently and always done it in terms of you've done it multiple times, etc. What type of, present company excluded, what type of entrepreneurs, dream team, etc. What does it look like? What do you look for? There are, I'm sure, as participants, there are people who want to start education businesses or who are part of education businesses, etc. who want to approach you. But tell us a little bit in terms of what does it look like for you, and how do you go about it, putting it together? This narrow piece. Once you've figured out that narrow piece, then what?
Yeah, that's very, very difficult, but there's some common themes, right? So first of all, successful education entrepreneurs, share a few characteristics. First of all, they are truly deeply passionate about education. They don't treat it as a kind of a wealth management idea, I'll do this, I'll flirt with this, and then I'll do something else. I think they're deeply committed to the notion of being successful in the education sector. But then they need something else. And that is about the ability to attract top talent. What I learned in the pharmaceutical industry that I used to work from, which is if you want to successfully manufacture a drug at scale, you have to succeed in the lab, then you have to succeed at a small scale, and then you have the massive, so you have to succeed at milligrams and kilos and then tons, right? And so making this change from the lab, the milligrams to the kilos to the tons, you need a different mindset in these 3 different phases. And I find a lot of very well-meaning, deeply passionate teams getting stuck either at the milligram stage or at the kilo stage, and they're not able to scale. So, you need a combination of, maybe exposure. So protagonists and teams that have lived and worked in other companies, have seen larger scale, have the ambition, to scale a business, have the ability to attract top talent. That combination then ultimately works. And so, from our portfolio, Manish Sabharwal is a great example. Prajod Rajan of Eurokids is a great example. These would be some of the role models we've seen in our portfolio.
Thank you. I think we have a bunch of questions already. Joy, if you don't mind, I'll hand it over to you. Imran, bear with us. We'll ask you some. We have a whole bunch of them. We can ask you some.
Look forward.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, if you could, quickly go to the Q&A section, there are a few questions there. I'll be happy to, just go summarize a few of them. So there's one question which we've received actually pretty early in this webinar from Sharang, and he asks whether foreign universities and what is their role? Do you think that they want to go set up, in fact, just representative offices in India and, in his words, go local? especially given like the fall revenues have dipped, and I think like a lot of them have now like very recently, in fact, come up with their fall plans. Is this something, or is there like a view here, Imran, that that in fact you would like to share with all of us?
Yeah, so one of our advisors on the board of advisors, Michael Queen, advises consortium of universities in the UK, and he was saying that through the COVID crisis, one thing is very clear. There's a very strong push in the UK, and remember, that's a very traditional market. You can imagine you have Oxford and Cambridge and all of the, and all of those colleges. There's a very strong push to make online and digital an integral part of what they do. The second push is to use digital to expand the enrollments beyond the physical limitations of their colleges and universities. Very strong strategic push. And the third, of course, is to get your China and India, enrollment going. So this will absolutely happen. Now the question is, how will it happen? So will it be through, setting up offices in India? Will they partner with, folks in India through a revenue share model? I think, they won't want to allocate a lot of capital. This is for them about revenue. So you'll see a lot of them really trying to get a piece of the study abroad market, which will be stunted for some time because children will be uncomfortable traveling abroad till this blows over. And they're going to feel pain, and they're going to want to compensate by getting a piece of the action by partnering with local, either companies or universities. But I don't see, large reputed universities setting up shop in India and putting real money to work is basically what I'm saying.
Thank you. We have another question actually coming in from Kevin, who's asking, and again, this is, I think, a point that we have spoken about earlier, on the role of in fact, virtual education, and does that have the promise to, in fact, just overtake your classroom education for the decade 2020, 2030? Again, this is a question which is quite open-ended. So if you have any views on this.
So the role of online education versus classroom, is that the question?
Yes, in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, I don't think it will completely eliminate classroom education for a variety of reasons. And if the question is more general, then, in India, you have 1.3 million schools, and you look at all these children. I mean, the vast majority of them don't have access to tablets and, smartphones, especially when their parents go to work. So, we're talking about, online being a permanent feature in school education will happen post-COVID. I expect it to be a permanent feature going forward. However, it will be restricted to, a very, very tiny, share of the overall market in maybe the top 20, 30 cities. But the vast majority, especially government schools, they'll have to come back. We can't afford it.
All right, thank you. Over here, this Nikhil, is there a view that you have around, I think there's, one question that we've got, I think again, from Sharan, where he speaks about the appetite of the Indian consumer to pay a premium for American degrees. While we speak about the interest coming from the US universities, what do you make of the demand side for the Indian consumer?
I think one of the things that I agree with Imran, I think COVID is sort of, and it was happening pre-COVID too, but I think COVID has put everybody on sort of a burner, if you will, that, outcome-based education wins against, just pure certifications or pure degree-based certification. So I think, consumers were holding traditional institutions accountable, more and more accountable, but I think that'll continue. So I think it's the same idea. I think you will say, we are actually already talking to a few brands in the West who want to come here and want to do online education in India, given, the government is recognizing online education, at least for the Indian. So I think there is a market for that, but at the same time, I think there is a market that meets those outcomes in terms of employment or upskilling, etc. So I think just because you're a US-based degree organization, I don't think you get to come to the Indian market and win just because you have the US stamp on you. I think you'll have to create that entire product or offering has to be a lot more holistic for you to succeed in this market and charge a premium.
Thank you. We've got another few questions coming in. Actually, there's one from Harsha and from Ganesh where I think in general, I'm just going to go summarize because it's across about 4 or 5 different questions. But the view is around, I think, a little bit of concern in terms of what next, right? In terms of what's like the ideal mix between online and classroom and the impact that both that these two have. I think while we again have alluded to this a little bit, but is there any thoughts that either of you have in terms of how would the next say 6 to 12 months look, especially for fundamental K-12 education in India?
Should I take that, Nikhil?
Yeah, please. K-12 is all you.
Yeah. No, so, I think it'll be a permanent feature, especially in private schools, at least until the vaccine, when people are fearful, you can't run shifts. It's very expensive to run 2 shifts in a day. Where this will likely settle is that you'll have to divide the school into cohorts that come into physical classrooms on alternate days, and on the other day they take online classes at home. That's and there'll be some variation of this, but basically online classes, digital content, intelligent tutoring systems, and so on will have to become a permanent feature even after schools reopen. That's my view.
I think this, and I'm looking at some of the questions too. I think this idea that is it online, is it offline, I don't think it's so black and white anymore, and I don't think it's going to remain black and white. I think right now it's black and white because frankly there is no offline, because it's not, regulatory wise it's not allowed, and from a health perspective it's not allowed. But I think this, I think there is effectiveness when in some cases where there is when you do it online, and there is effectiveness when they're offline. So I think it's a little bit on what you're trying to do. For example, for upskilling courses with experience of 10 years plus, I think an online solution is a very good solution. I think it's, it doesn't get my car out. I don't have to move. I can do it at a convenient pace. But maybe for a K-12 fourth year person who needs to learn how to socialize and talk to her peers, etc., I think you need an offline solution. So I think this, we have this, we try to bracket, let's do online, let's do offline. I think it's a lot more complicated than that, and it needs I think one thing I agree with Imran is maybe if the blend was X percentage, that blend is going to be 3X percentage going forward.
Thanks for that, guys. I'm just going to take 2 more questions, I think in interest of time. One, I'm trying to again go summarize 2 different questions. There's one around the preparedness, in terms of the government and the infrastructure that we need, right? I think it's easier said than done that yes, we'll move everything online, but what is the impact of infrastructure in terms of what all do we need, especially in say semi-urban and rural parts of India? So is there a view around any kind of startups or any kind of solutioning that's happening in that space?
In terms of online infrastructure, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, see, that's hard. I was speaking to someone, a very, very successful entrepreneur who's, taking, online classes to schools, and he works with affordable private schools. And I was asking him, how does he get these schools to pay for hardware? Because, even the cheapest tablet will cost you 6,500 rupees. Mm-hmm. So I feel it's very, very challenging right now, especially in affordable private schools. I haven't seen any government initiative at scale or private initiative at scale to allow, let's say, a cheaper tablet or cheaper devices to be made available at scale. I've seen some initiatives, some interesting ones that are able to take content to government schools in remote areas that don't need broadband. It's essentially, it has content residing in a mobile server, so to speak, that can be taken from class to class. But I haven't seen that at scale, if that was your question.
All right. Thanks for this, Imran. I think we are out of time now. What we will do is we will keep accepting some of these questions, and we have the email addresses for all the participants as well. So in case there are any more questions which you all have, either for Imran or for Nikhil, please feel free to go drop us an email, and we'll be happy to revert to all of you. And I think with that, let me take this opportunity to quickly thank Imran for his time this evening, and also to Nikhil for your time this evening.
Thanks a lot, Imran.
Thanks, Nikhil, Joy. Thanks for the punctuality and very well organized. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.